Hey, welcome to another Real Humans, Great Souls podcast with yours truly, Professor Johanna Sophia of Johanna's Raw Foods and Coaching and the Rawsome Life Project. Lots of progress recently on the Rawsome Life Project. But today, let me calm down and not be so excited. Today's podcast is about failure. What is failure? Who fails? Why do we fail? What do we call failure? Why do we even have such a thing, such a concept as failure? Why can it not all be just par for the course, life? But no, we have to have success or failure. Because our culture has developed in such ways that we consider every misstep a failure or every non-success a failure. And I do need this because I need to read my own notes. And therefore, I'm going to begin with two failure stories that were just very, very fresh. And let me try not to get emotional, but this morning I was notified that a very dear former client of mine, 8 years ago, he was working with me and brought his health to real flourishing and powerful. And even though he was very miserable when we met. So this morning, I got the news that he passed. And that hits home, right? Have I failed this client? Is it my failure that I did not insist on him staying on the lifestyle to keep his body fit? We perceive that as failure. And can I learn from it to be more insistent, to give more examples of what happens when you don't stay the path, stay on the path, or stay the course is the expression? Or is it my misinterpretation of his life and, of course, his free will and his decision to not follow the protocol for staying alive in his very fragile situation? You know, we're all born, of course, with failures in our system, if you will. We're all born with bodies that have mistakes, that have failures built into them. And some more, some less, but we all do have, right? Failures that happened in the creation of our bodies, whether in vitro or genetically or post-birth. Impairments upon our body happen. Impairments upon our mind happen. Failures of the body to repair itself happen. So this whole concept of failure, my first sentence here is, I messed that one up. I was going to ask, well, is life a failure because we all die? And of course, that's kind of a silly question, right? Because if failure of the system, i.e. death, is built into life, into the life cycle, doesn't that mean that we have to accept or have to recognize failure as part of this rhythm of life altogether. But then why do we work hard to have less failures or to learn from our failures to implement in the future? The second story of today was that I got to my teenage clients and learned that one of the new girls is about to fail her school year. And again, when somebody is in emotional turmoil and emotional stress, under emotional stress, and then is made to fail a grade, what does that do to a human? That's, of course, in my view, not her failure, it's the failure of the system. We're failing people by failing them. Now, just the dry analysis, of course, of what we call failure is we set certain expectations, we set certain goals, we set certain measuring poles, if you will, milestones, etc. And if we don't reach them in the given time anticipated, we call that a failure. And then it occurred to me that only because we have these measurements in place that everything needs to get measured on a scale, right? Here is dark and there is light, and here is poor and here is rich, and here is failed class and here is success, or here is the F and there is the A or the A plus. So we measure everything on this scale in our Western culture in particular, well, in Asian cultures too, very much so now. And in so many ways miss the point by calling an attempt to do something that surprisingly teaches us something different, or life throws us a different wrench and we don't get there. We call that a failure as opposed to calling it a step in the process or a turn in the path that we need to pursue to maybe still get there. So planning, of course, needs to be part of our life, or else we could not create. And there we're getting to the crux of the matter. Is failure inevitably part of creativity? Can we be creative without failing? Imagine creating a painting or any kind of piece of art, or writing a book or a poem, etc. Isn't it inevitable that on the way to completing it, there are all these corrective measures that we have to implement in order to complete the thing? And are those corrective measures we take, are those denoting that there had been a failure that we need to correct? Right? Or is it just that we can acknowledge that the process is always back, down, back and around, and that creativity in and of itself includes those dead ends, those maybe even crashes, maybe even throwing it to the curb and then finding a new path or finding a new approach altogether. So what then do we need failure for? Do we need failure also to increase our resilience, to build upon what we already had, but which maybe contributed but did not lead to the goal? I'm trying to find stories and imagery that I can use to illustrate what I'm saying. Let's say we're climbing a mountain, or like yesterday, I was climbing not a big mountain, but still a mountain, and walking in the rain, in the muddy soil through this 80-acre land parcel that we're looking at. And of course, inevitably for me, I got my foot stuck in a vine and fell. Now I could have said, okay, I'm not going any further. This is too difficult, and I'm all muddy and wet. And so now let's turn around and forget about this exploration, right? But what do? I get up, I dust myself off, but I mud myself off as best I can. And we continue the exploration, we continue the walking that land to find out whether this is something we want to pursue to build our project. My voice is failing me, so I need to give it some ointment. Yes, so this day was, of course, full of sadness and self-doubt and reflection, and also in my mind honoring this human being. He was young, whom I was able to help at one time and then failed to continue to help. And then the different kind of stress in the afternoon with someone whom I feel society fails, and she was crying. Then led me to the question, do we need failure to have those deep feelings of self-doubt, feelings of disappointment, feelings of sadness and depth of experience, and the realization that life is short, so the intensity of it is actually a beautiful thing, including the depth of feeling that we experience when we experience that thing that we call failure. When we feel that it's our failure, right? It's our fault is also not the right word here, but our mistake, our weakness, our wrongdoing or wrong planning that leads to this deep feeling of our inadequacy. Now, if we're not able, if we don't get the support, if we don't have the feeling that other humans are helping us in those moments. Like my daughter was describing to me this morning, because she works in a hospital administration, that a woman was devastated that her loved one had passed unexpectedly, and and my daughter says she sat down with her and held her hand and let her talk about the person who had passed. And how just that vicinity can bring us back to the life we are living, to the next attempt at completing the task or the project or the plan, for that matter. That's what matters in these moments. If we don't find the human support when we feel we failed, we can become self-destructive. And I think that's happening a lot today because there is not enough support in our life. And unfortunately, there are other forms of where failure impacts our modern, let's say, Western culture. And that is the planned failure of things by profit-making businesses. What do I mean? I mean, when a product is created with what is called planned obsolescence, your machine, from your kitchen machine to your car, is designed so that it fails in a predictable time. And if that wasn't planned, or if that weren't planned is the correct grammar, right? Then the profit on the next car that's going to be sold to you, or the next machine that is going to be sold to you, would not be calculable, right? It could not be calculated. So the car must break down, or the motor must break down after 20 years of operating, right? Or maybe even after 15 or 13 or X amount of miles. Or so the failure is built into the product, because in a capitalist world, profit needs to be calculated so that it can grow and be maintained and be projected into the future with a relative certainty. So planned obsolescence is what drives our so-called market economy. It's not really, it's much more autocratically designed and run by the powers above the powers, if you know what I mean. So planned obsolescence, planned failure, is another vicious animal that does not allow us to benefit from the deep feeling experience. Of course, we will have a deep feeling experience when our car breaks down in the middle of a long trip and we're left with nothing, right? We have to figure out how to. It happened to me several times in my life. My cars always fail in the middle of the trip, as opposed to maybe foreseen. Then we are exploited by the makers, manufacturers of those products, because even though we ourselves might even know better, we can't make that product that does not have the same planned obsolescence built into it, or has a longer lifespan, or has a different construction altogether. So just as failure in our school system and in our evaluation system is, if you will, dumbing down our creativity because we have to abide by this scale and get to the pass up here where we would fail down here. Like my wonderful sweet girl, teenage girl, who has so many emotional and hormonal issues that she has to deal with, and she will be told she failed, whereas it could just be that society could say, give her the time. So in the case of planned obsolescence, we are the victims of planned failure. And that's a very different animal, very different form of failure. Now, there's also, of course, the other profitable form of failure is when a product doesn't really serve what it's made out to serve, but keeps failing us so that we have to continue buying that product. And that applies to most of our medical products, right? Because if the product would really solve the problem and we could start completing, let's say, the healing process, it would not be as profitable as when failure of efficiency of that product is planned into the product. Does that make sense? Imagine a medicine like insulin, right? All right, I don't want to talk too much about the details, but you can see, right, that its perpetual use because of its inefficiency, of its failure to be doing the job, perpetuates profits or increases profits very, very dramatically. So failure is also exploited or used to exploit us, the consumer in particular. What can we then say? I mean, just think about it. A remedy, let's call it that fails to actually alter the state of a person's being toward health, toward wholeness, does not do us a favor, but rather keeps us in bondage of going back and back and back and back because the remedy fails to get the process accomplished, get the healing accomplished. Now, when we repeat the same, there's the saying, of course, doing the same thing that failed to serve us last time over and over is a sign of insanity, right? Trying it over and over without changing the approach is a sign of insanity. Now, that would make all remedies, I hope that word works, all remedies that are given to people to take forever and ever, again and again and again, such insane concepts and such insane failures, right? Because they fail to do what they're supposed to do. Now, can we avoid failure? Do we want to avoid failure altogether in our own growing process, in our own creative process? No. Now we're going back to being creative and needing to come against these boundaries where, oh, this was the wrong way to go. This is not working. let's try this, or let's rethink this and go a different way around. I was solving math problems with another one of my clients, students, teenagers, and she was failing to find the solution because she was trying to apply a formula but did not understand the logic of the equation or of the question. And the question was, if 32 ounces of a liquid cost $8 and the price per ounce remains the same, what is the price for 8 ounces? So it was a ratio thinking, and I tried to make drawings explain what that ratio is. So if 32 cost $8, what's the price of 1 ounce, right? 32 makes 8. What's the price of 1 ounce? And then what's the price of 8 ounces, therefore? So realizing that these are real volumes and real values suddenly made the situation real. And we actually put out little items, right, to show the ratio of one to the other, and then create the different amount to the other, so that the concept became clear. So failure often can also be that we don't understand the real issue, the real value, or the real conceptual thinking process that we need to apply, because we follow a formula and apply it wrongly, or apply it wrongly, right? Do not apply it appropriately or correctly, because we don't understand the underlying logic. So if we don't understand the concept of what 8 is to 32, 4 is to what, right? Or 4 is to 16, or 1 is to 4. Therefore, seeing those things made all the difference, and then she could no longer fail, because she could see that if she got the result of upside down number, it didn't make sense. So understanding the concepts, or finding the concepts, maybe even when we are in the creative process, requires us to move somewhere and fail and see that, oh, that does not make sense, and be able to go back and rethink and step back into a process, but let's have the process be a little different, or at least take into account what we just learned from the process that didn't work, and possibly get to the correct result, or to the success. So failure and success are, of course, two of those opposites, as so many things in life, all of which are necessary to create the dynamic route of our life, right? And if there were no dynamics, life would be pretty boring. Now, sometimes, we crave that boring life, because we call that stability. When there is no failure and no struggle and no ups and downs, it becomes stability, which we value as a thing in our life. But stability often also means stagnation. So then taking a risk means, what are we risking? We're risking failure, And then we can either come back to stability and boring. Boring is not the right word, if you know what I mean. When we're stagnant, most of the time, we're not really happy because the joyfulness that we get from struggling and failing a little and struggling somewhere and failing and struggling and then getting to success is just enormously different from from an even keel, right? There's no music in stability. Oh, that's bad to say, because everybody needs we need a certain amount of stability. We all need food and water and air and a roof over our head and warm clothing if we live in a cold climate. So those things, of course, also could be called stability, but they're the underpinnings to even keep us alive. So that's not what I'm talking about. I'm not saying you risk your life in that sense. But then beyond that, in the manifestation of our authentic self, we need to take risk and we need to fail a little bit here and there, or sometimes big time too, and then get back up and do it differently. Sometimes bigger, sometimes smaller, but do it differently so that we get to a level of accomplishment that gives us that sense of, okay, we're there. Of course, we're never there until it's over. And that's the other interesting thing that I wanted to touch on. Failure also makes us aware that there is no ultimate success. Because when you're at that success, you can't feel it unless you go back down a little again and up. If you just, again, then you get to stability, even keel, and that's not a great experience of being alive. So there are, of course, I'm sometimes accused of being too optimistic and too, always interpreting everything as a learning experience and it's all good. And whereas I should be more discerning and I should be more avoiding the risk and the failure. And that's true. Sometimes I really, really feel that too. And then again, I don't regret the many, many things that I've started and failed at. And maybe it also isn't failure when we get there. Of course, the most extreme case is my food company and the factory and the manufacturing and the shipping out to all these stores, and then realizing that there was no way to continue because we had completely run out of cash flow and we literally just failed miserably, dropped from having worked so hard to get there, to get up there, and then it all failed. And then we think, bad planning, I should have, could have, would have. But the beauty of it is also, we did get there. It didn't last long, but we did get there. Do I want to miss that experience? Yeah, my kids sometimes say they want to miss that experience because it was hard on them when they would have wanted to be teenagers and go party with everybody and get drunk, which we certainly could not do working, all three of us at the factory, day and night. Not day and night, I mean, but every day, long hours. Yeah, so are there things that we would want? That's the next thing. Do we want to try and have our kids avoid their own failures? We get to this helicopter parenting thing, right? That phenomenon where we don't allow our kids to have any experiences, and therefore they cannot actually develop a sense of self, a sense of self-respect, a sense of risk, a sense of accomplishment, a sense of failure, and then also success. And then they feel altogether like a failure. I think that's a lot of the problem that our teenagers have today. They feel like failures because they've never been challenged to accomplish anything. So we're turning them into failures by helicopter parenting them. They're not allowed to climb trees. They're not allowed to build their own huts in the wood or their own garden or their own machine. They're not allowed to tinker with stuff because we're always afraid that they might hurt themselves or that something might go wrong or they might fall from the tree, etc., etc. Do we really do our children a favor by avoiding their own little failures and therefore avoiding their successes as well? Their sense of success, they're just even keel going along. They don't have a sense of accomplishment. So allowing for failure therefore becomes necessary, becomes important, leads to success as a parent, and of course, success for the child or the children at hand. Now, we could equate failure with a learning experience. And still allow for the sadness or the disappointment or the even anger at oneself, right? I could have thought about it better. I could have gotten up earlier and gotten more of it done so that I wouldn't have fallen for the fast track that led to the failure. All these things that we blame ourselves for, maybe they are also part of the learning experience and important. I go through it almost every day. Should I have gotten up earlier? Could I do this faster? Do I want to do this faster in my morning routine, for example? I'm lazying around in the morning, right? I sit on my bed and I think, and then I take my time, I take my cold shower, then I think about what I want to wear today and the color scheme, and do I need that? Or could I get into the routine of just chop, 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 chop? I have enough in terms of clothing that I could just put that together in a minute. Or do I need that time so that I can later say to myself, oh my God, I failed to be on time for my workout. I failed, etc. So back to when failure leads us to try again. And when trying again using the same approach means insanity because it cannot lead to a different outcome, what does it do? It forces us to change course, to change a point of view, to change perspective, to change materials that we use to accomplish something. It changes maybe the recipe if we're making food. It may entail all kinds of changes, but failure also forces us to change. And I learned halfway through my life only that the only constant in life is change. The only constant is change, and that creates dynamic. So we need to fail and succeed and fail and succeed and fail and succeed. But of course, if we only fail repeatedly, and if there are no successes in between, that means that we do not get the support from our surrounding, from our mentors, our teachers, our coaches, our friends, examples, family members that would help us to change and have that new approach and try again. So, what's the bottom line? This is another short podcast. The bottom line is that failure is part of progress. If we want progress, we have to risk and we have to fail and learn and find the better approach. And still, that may only be the success here may only be the better approach for a little while, and then a new avenue becomes available or is suddenly upon us because science and the view on things also change all the time. I'm failing to stay awake. So what do we do? Can we build failure into our plan? No, of course not. That's the point. Failure happens in spite of our best planning because life never is an exact science. Life never inevitably happens this way. You've driven to school or work, 500 times, and that one time a car runs into you, an animal runs into you, and you fail to get to your goal as planned. Because life happens, and of course, many other things may have happened in those 500 times that were smaller issues as well. So because life in and of itself is never totally predictable and linear, I'm just thinking that's also why it is so silly to think that AI and robots will really be here to take over forever. Because what are they made of? They're still made of materials, right? If they function in this on this planet. We always think that cyberspace is somewhere in the clouds, just some vibrations. No, they manifest, they come together, they function, are put out there and captured again in machinery, in all these, we call them servers, right? But they're just large computers, huge warehouses full of computers that create what we call the internet. And those are made out of materials. So materials also always have a failing point. They must eventually fail. So do the materials that robots are made of, the joints, the whatever. Maybe sand gets in the joints or dust or whatever it is. Eventually, there is failure. We came across a book that was discussed on a radio program, the kids and I, this is many, many years ago when they were younger. And it was called The Killer of Civilization. And it discussed the fact that metal, as it was used in all our bridges and high rises and in our factories, that the metals, the irons and steels, and the coppers for that matter as well, rust. And rust was this killer of civilization. Because, I mean, these days when I drive through the American countryside and cross bridges, etc., many of them are entirely looking rusty, and you just wonder how many more years they have before they literally crumble. So failure is part of all materials on planet Earth as well. Some rocks, like the rocks that the pyramids are built of, last for thousands and thousands of years. Yet the layer that was over the rocks has long gone. And even the rocks will eventually be washed away by sand and water. So the ameliorating factor is that failure is part of the life cycle. Everything grows and wilts and dies. And in this process is seed creation and a new life springing up. So let's just enjoy these cycles. Let's enjoy these dynamic experiences. And let's see that we live through them with as much awareness and consciousness as we possibly can. And then we can turn them into learning experiences if we consciously experience them, because many of them we do not have an influence upon, right? Like the car accident where somebody drives into you, where you are absolutely not in power. Or let's take the Canadian truckers and their money being taken, and you have zero influence upon this banking machinery that captured and stole your money because it's in a position. I'm not equating life cycles with stealing, right? That's not what I'm equating. I'm just saying there are different factors in our lives that will lead to different ways of failing where we cannot have an influence or prevent this kind of failure. And even our own, we cannot really prevent because we don't know. We are not able to predict all influences that come together when the plan that we have gets into real life. Okay. Finding the more successful approach means, again, being creative, and therefore failure, in my view, is part of creativity. So let's explore that. We always explore those things in my class, in my 12-month class, the Super Happy Body class, where we explore finding those risk-taking moments and making them not so dangerous, but still allow everybody to have that experience, because then you become creative and then you implement your authentic self in your business or your art or your lifestyle, all of the above, right? You take the risk and experience what it does. All right. I think I've talked about a lot of aspects of failing. Now, of course, I totally disagree that that our life has to include planned obsolescence and exploiting failure to the not benefit of a population or of our customers. So that's not part of a learning process that I would find good. I would find that, in fact, despicable to create other people's failure for our own profit. I'm only talking about our own failure at completing and or achieving and or reaching a goal at this time that we had hoped to reach. So there, it's a dynamic process, and we need to learn to deal with that dynamic process with the resilience that we get when we have a super happy body, which we create by various means, not just nutrition, but that's number one, but other means as well in the Super Happy Body class. All right, let's fail ourselves to success in a creative manner and enjoy all the moments of experience and of these aha moments when we realize, oh, that's why I failed and I will do it differently, therefore. All right, that's today's podcast on failure. And why is failure inevitable? Because it does create our progress. Make sense? All right. Fail yourself to success. Join the class and be well until next week. Ciao.